My name is Samuel Hayes, and I've been ranching in the Arizona Territory for the better part of 15 years. At 43 years old, I thought I'd seen everything these harsh desert lands could throw at a man. Drought that could kill cattle by the hundreds, flash floods that could wash away a lifetime of work in minutes, and Apache raids that could leave a settlement nothing but ashes and memories. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for what I found on that scorching August morning in 1885, when the desert heat was already shimmering off the red rocks. Before the sun had fully risen, I was checking the water levels in the creek that ran through the eastern section of my property when I saw her. At first, I thought it might be a mirage that heat could play tricks on a man's eyes out here. But as I rode closer, I realized it was real. A young Apache girl, maybe 16 or 17 years old, collapsed beside a cluster of prickly pear cacti. She was unconscious, her lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration, her dark skin burned by the relentless sun. Her traditional Apache dress was torn and dirty, and she was so thin I could see the outline of her ribs through the fabric. It was clear she hadn't eaten in days, maybe weeks. My first instinct was caution. Relations between the Apache and white settlers had been tense for decades, and finding an Apache on my land could mean trouble. But as I looked down at this girl, barely more than a child, all I could see was someone who was dying. I dismounted quickly and knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. Her pulse was weak but steady, and her breathing was shallow but regular. She was alive, but barely. "Easy there," I murmured, though I doubted she could hear me. "You're going to be all right." I lifted her carefully onto my horse, supporting her limp form against my chest as we rode back to the ranch house. She weighed almost nothing, like holding a bird with broken wings. My housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, a stern woman in her 50s who'd been with me since I'd bought the ranch, met me at the door with alarm written across her weathered face. "Mr. Hayes, what in the Lord's name?" "Apache girl," I said simply, carrying the unconscious form into the house. "Found her half dead by the creek. She needs water and food, quickly." Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened. "Mr. Hayes, you can't bring an Apache into this house. What if she's a scout? What if there are others coming? Look at her, Mrs. Patterson. Does she look like a threat to you?" The older woman studied the girl's emaciated form, and her expression softened slightly. "She's just a child." "Exactly, and she's dying. Get me some water and broth, and prepare the guest room." "The guest room? Mr. Hayes, surely you don't mean to." "I mean to save her life. That's what any Christian would do." Mrs. Patterson pursed her lips but nodded. "Yes, sir, though I still think this is a mistake." I carried the girl to the guest room and laid her gently on the bed. Her breathing was so shallow I had to lean close to make sure she was still alive. When Mrs. Patterson returned with water and a bowl of thin chicken broth, I began the delicate process of trying to get some fluids into her. Slowly, I whispered, dribbling water between her cracked lips. Just a little at a time. It took nearly an hour, but gradually she began to swallow reflexively. Some color returned to her cheeks, and her breathing became slightly stronger. "She's going to need constant care for the next few days," Mrs. Patterson observed, her maternal instincts overriding her prejudices, "and we'll need to be very careful about how much we feed her. Too much too fast could kill her." Over the next 3 days, I barely left the girl's side. I fed her water and broth every hour, watched for signs of fever or infection, and waited for her to regain consciousness. Mrs. Patterson helped, though she continued to express concerns about harboring an Apache. "The territorial authorities won't like this," she warned. "And if word gets out to the other ranchers, let me worry about that," I replied. "Right now, all that matters is keeping her alive." On the 4th day, she finally opened her eyes. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, reading from the Bible. When I heard a small sound, looking up, I found myself staring into the darkest, most intelligent eyes I'd ever seen. She was awake, and she was watching me with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Easy," I said softly, setting the Bible aside. "You're safe. No one's going to hurt you." She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. I reached for the water glass and helped her take small sips. "My name is Samuel," I said slowly, pointing to myself. "Samuel." She studied my face for a long moment, then whispered something in Apache. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was questioning. "You're on my ranch," I explained, though I wasn't sure how much English she understood. "I found you by the creek. You were very sick." She tried to sit up, but I gently pressed her back down. "Rest. You need to get your strength back." Over the next few days, as she grew stronger, I began to piece together her story. Her English was limited but functional, learned from missionaries at the San Carlos Reservation. Her name was Aiyana, which she told me meant eternal blossom. In her language, she had been living at San Carlos with her grandmother, the last of her immediate family. When her grandmother died the previous month, the Indian agent had tried to force her into marriage with a much older Apache man she didn't know, a man with a reputation for violence toward women. "I run," she said simply, her dark eyes flashing with remembered fear. "Better to die free than live as slave." She had been wandering the desert for nearly 2 weeks, surviving on cactus fruit and what little water she could find, when dehydration and starvation had finally overcome her. "Why you help me?" she asked one evening as I brought her dinner, a simple meal of bread, beans, and beef stew that Mrs. Patterson had prepared. It was a question I'd been asking myself. The practical answer was that I couldn't have left her to die, but there was something more, something I couldn't quite put into words. Because it was the right thing to do, I said finally. She studied my face with those penetrating dark eyes. White men not usually think Apache worth saving. Well, this white man does. As Aiyana grew stronger, she began to help around the house, despite my protests that she should rest. She was remarkably skilled. She could cook, clean, mend clothes, and tend to injuries with an expertise that amazed both Mrs. Patterson and me. "Where did you learn all this?" I asked one day as I watched her expertly bandage a cut on my hand that I'd gotten while repairing a fence. "Apache women must know many things," she replied. "Must be able to care for family, heal the sick, make clothes, preserve food. Grandmother, teach me." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." Aiyana's expression grew sad. She say I have gift for healing. Say I could help many people if I learn white man's medicine too. Is that something you'd want to do? She nodded eagerly. Yes, but Apache girl cannot go to white man's school, cannot learn white man's medicine. I found myself thinking about that conversation long into the night. Here was a young woman with obvious intelligence and a genuine desire to help others. But her race and circumstances had closed off almost every opportunity for advancement. 2 weeks after I'd found her, Aiyana was strong enough to leave, if she chose to. But when I mentioned this possibility, she looked stricken. "Do you want me to go?" she asked quietly. "I want you to do whatever makes you happy and safe." I replied honestly. "If you want to stay, you're welcome here. If you want to leave, I'll help you get wherever you want to go." "I have nowhere to go," she said simply. "San Carlos is not safe for me. Other Apache settlements too far, and I know no one there. Desert will kill me if I try to travel alone again." "Then stay," I said, "for as long as you want." Mrs. Patterson was less enthusiastic about this arrangement. "Mr. Hayes, people are already starting to talk. A single man living with an Apache girl ... It doesn't look proper." "I don't care how it looks," I replied firmly. "Aiyana has nowhere else to go, and she's been nothing but helpful since she's been here. But what about your reputation? What about finding a wife? No decent white woman will marry a man who's been living with an Apache." I hadn't thought about marriage in years. My first wife, Mary, had died of fever 3 years after we'd moved to Arizona, and I'd assumed I'd spend the rest of my life alone. The idea that harboring Aiyana might affect my marriage prospects seemed irrelevant. "My reputation will survive," I said. "And if a woman can't accept my decision to help someone in need, then she's not the kind of woman I'd want to marry anyway." But Mrs. Patterson's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. Word of Aiyana's presence at my ranch had indeed spread, and the reactions from my neighbors ranged from disapproval to outright hostility. "You're playing with fire, Hayes," warned my nearest neighbor, Jack Morrison, when he stopped by one afternoon. "Harboring an Apache is bad enough, but a young woman? People are going to start thinking you've gone native." "Let them think what they want," I replied. "Aiyana is under my protection, and that's not going to change." "Protection?" Morris' voice was skeptical. "Is that what you call it? Come on, Sam. We both know what this looks like." I felt my temper rising. "If you're suggesting something improper is happening under my roof, Jack, you'd better think very carefully about your next words." Morrison held up his hands. "I'm just saying how it appears to others. And appearances matter in a place like this." After Morrison left, I found Aiyana sitting on the back porch, staring out at the desert. She'd obviously overheard at least part of the conversation. "I bring trouble for you," she said without looking at me. "No," I replied firmly, sitting down beside her. "Ignorant people bring trouble. You've brought nothing but help and friendship." She turned to look at me then, and I saw tears in her dark eyes. "In my tribe, when someone saves your life, you owe them life debt, but you ask for nothing. Why?" I thought about her question for a long moment. "Because friendship isn't about debt, Aiyana. It's about caring for someone without expecting anything in return. Is that what we are, friends?" "I hope so," I said. "I'd like to think so." She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her since she'd awakened in my guest room. "Yes, we are friends." As the weeks passed, I began to realize that Aiyana had become more than just a guest in my house. She'd become an integral part of my daily life. She helped with the cooking and cleaning, tended to sick animals with remarkable skill, and had even begun teaching me some Apache words and customs. In return, I helped her improve her English and taught her to read and write better. She was an eager student, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. "Someday," she told me one evening as we sat reading together by lamplight, "I want to be doctor, help both Apache and white people." "That's a wonderful dream," I said, "and I think you could do it, given the chance." "You really think so?" "I know so. You're one of the smartest people I've ever met, Aiyana, Apache, or white." But even as our friendship deepened, I was aware that our situation couldn't continue indefinitely. The disapproval of my neighbors was growing more vocal, and I worried about what might happen if their hostility turned to action. The crisis came sooner than I expected, and in a way I hadn't anticipated. 3 months after I'd found Aiyana, Sheriff Tom Bradley rode up to my ranch with 2 other men I didn't recognize. From their dress and bearing, I could tell they were government officials of some kind. "Afternoon," Sam Bradley said as he dismounted. "We need to talk." I stepped out onto the porch, aware that Aiyana was watching from the kitchen window. "What can I do for you, Tom?" "This is Agent William Crawford from the Bureau of Indian Affairs," Bradley said, indicating a thin, officious-looking man in his 40s. "And this is Marshal Robert Kane from the Territorial Marshal's office." Crawford stepped forward, his expression stern. "Mr. Hayes, I understand you're harboring a runaway Apache from the San Carlos Reservation. I'm providing shelter to a young woman who was dying when I found her," I replied carefully. "The Apache girl known as Aiyana is the property of the United States government," Crawford continued. "She's supposed to be on the reservation, under proper supervision." "Property?" I felt my anger rising. "She's a human being, not property." "She's a ward of the government," Crawford corrected, "and she needs to be returned to San Carlos immediately." "Over my dead body?" I said flatly. Marshal Kane spoke for the first time. "Mr. Hayes, you're interfering with federal law. If you don't cooperate, I'll have to arrest you." "On what charges?" "Harboring a fugitive, for starters, interfering with federal agents in the performance of their duties. I could probably come up with a few more if I needed to." Sheriff Bradley looked uncomfortable. "Sam, I don't like this, any more than you do, but the law is the law. The law is wrong." I replied. "Aiyana came here to escape a forced marriage. She was starving when I found her. Are you telling me I should have let her die?" "What happens on the reservation is not your concern," Crawford said coldly. "These people need to learn to follow the rules of civilized society." "Civilized?" I laughed bitterly. "You call forcing a teenage girl to marry a man she's never met civilized?" "I call it maintaining order," Crawford replied. "The Apache need structure, discipline. They need to learn to live like white people. Aiyana is more civilized than half the white men." "I know," I shot back. "She's intelligent, skilled, and has a good heart. What more do you want?" "I want her back on the reservation where she belongs," Crawford said firmly. "You have 1 hour to produce her, or Marshal Kane will arrest you and will search the property." After the 3 men left to wait in town, I found Aiyana in the kitchen, her face pale but determined. "I heard," she said simply. "I must go." "No," I said firmly. "There has to be another way." "What other way?" "They have law on their side. You cannot fight government." "Watch me," I replied grimly. I spent the next hour thinking furiously, trying to come up with a solution. Finally, an idea began to form, risky, unconventional, but possibly our only chance. When Crawford, Kane, and Bradley returned, I was waiting for them on the porch. Well, Crawford demanded, "Where is she?" "I have a proposition," I said. "You're not in a position to make propositions," Kane replied. "Hear me out," I continued. "What if Aiyana didn't have to return to the reservation? What if she had another option, such as?" Crawford asked suspiciously. "Marriage?" I said simply. "To me?" The 3 men stared at me in shock. Sheriff Bradley was the first to find his voice. "Sam, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," I replied. "If Aiyana marries me, she becomes a citizen through marriage. She'd no longer be a ward of the government." Crawford's face was turning red. That's preposterous. A white man can't marry an Apache." "Actually, he can," I said. "I checked the territorial laws. There's nothing preventing it, but but it's not done." Crawford sputtered. "Maybe it should be," I replied calmly. Marshal Kane stepped forward. "Even if such a marriage were legal, it would have to be voluntary on both parties. You can't force the girl to marry you." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said. "The choice would be entirely hers." At that moment, Aiyana appeared in the doorway. She'd been listening, and her face was unreadable. "Aiyana," I said, turning to her, "these men want to take you back to San Carlos, back to the forced marriage you ran from. I'm offering you another choice. You could marry me instead, not because you have to, but because it would give you freedom and protection under the law." She studied my face for a long moment. "You would do this for me? Marry me to save me from reservation?" I would have said honestly, "But only if it's what you want. I won't force you into one marriage to escape another." "And after, what would happen after we marry?" "I had thought about this. We'd be married in name, but you'd be free to live your life as you choose. If you wanted to leave, to go somewhere else, I wouldn't stop you. If you wanted to stay and be friends like we are now, that would be fine too." Crawford was practically apoplectic. "This is a mockery of the institution of marriage." "No," I replied. "This is 2 people helping each other. Aiyana gets her freedom, and I get well, I get to keep my friends safe." Aiyana was quiet for several minutes, thinking. Finally, she looked up at me with those dark, intelligent eyes. "You would really do this? Risk everything for me?" "Yes," I said simply. She turned to Crawford. "If I marry him, I am free. No more reservation." Crawford looked like he'd swallowed something sour. "Technically, yes. Marriage to a citizen would change your legal status." "Then I accept," Aiyana said firmly. "I will marry Samuel." The wedding took place 3 days later in the small church in town. It was a strange affair. The bride was Apache, The groom was a rancher who'd never expected to marry again, and half the town was there out of curiosity rather than celebration. Reverend Matthews, the town preacher, had initially refused to perform the ceremony, but when I pointed out that there was nothing in the Bible against it, and that he'd married plenty of couples for less noble reasons, he reluctantly agreed. Aiyana wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her alter from one of my late wife's gowns. She looked beautiful but nervous as we stood before the altar. "Do you, Samuel Hayes, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Matthews asked. "I do," I replied, meaning it more than I'd expected to. "Do you, Aiyana, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said quietly but clearly. "Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife." There was no kiss. We'd agreed that the ceremony was legal necessity, not romance. But as we walked out of the church together, I felt a strange sense of rightness about what we'd done. The reception was small and awkward. Most of the town's prominent citizens had declined to attend, though a few of my ranch hands and some of the more open-minded townspeople came to wish us well. Agent Crawford left town immediately after the ceremony, clearly disgusted by the turn of events. Marshal Kane tipped his hat to us politely before departing, and Sheriff Bradley shook my hand with a mixture of admiration and concern. "I hope you know what you're doing, Sam," he said quietly. "So do I, Tom, so do I." That night, back at the ranch, Aiyana and I sat on the porch, as we had so many evenings before. But everything felt different now. We were married, legally bound together, though neither of us was quite sure what that meant for our relationship. "Thank you," she said finally, "for giving me freedom." "Thank you for trusting me," I replied. "What happens now?" I thought about her question. "Now we figure out how to be married friends, I guess. We'll take it one day at a time." She smiled at that. One day at a time. I like that. As the weeks passed, we settled into a new routine. Aiyana continued to help around the ranch, but now she did so as my wife rather than my guest. The change in her legal status was immediately apparent. Could go into town without fear of being arrested, she could own property, and she was no longer subject to the arbitrary rules of the reservation system. But the change in our personal relationship was more subtle and complex. We were friends, as we'd always been, but there was a new intimacy born of shared commitment and mutual trust. We talked more openly about our hopes and fears, our past experiences, and our dreams for the future. "I want to learn more about medicine," Aiyana told me one evening. "Real medicine, not just traditional healing. There's a doctor in Tucson who might be willing to teach you," I suggested. "Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, she's one of the few female doctors in the territory. I could write to her." Aiyana's eyes lit up. "You would do that? Of course. You're my wife now. Your dreams are important to me." The word wife still felt strange on my tongue, but I was beginning to understand that our unconventional marriage might actually work. We cared about each other, we respected each other, and we were building something together, not romantic love, perhaps, but something equally valuable. However, not everyone in the community was ready to accept our arrangement. The hostility that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over in a way that would test everything we'd built together. The trouble started 6 months after our wedding, when a group of Apache raiders attacked a settlement about 50 miles south of our ranch. 3 white families were killed, and the territorial authorities launched a massive manhunt for the perpetrators. Unfortunately, the attack reignited all the old prejudices and fears about Apache people, and Aiyana became a target for the community's anger and suspicion. It began with small things: cold stares when we went to town, whispered conversations. That stopped when we approached shopkeepers who were suddenly less friendly than they'd been before, but it escalated quickly. One morning, I found a crude sign nailed to our front gate, "Apache Lover," painted in red letters. The next week, someone shot one of our horses, a gentle mare that Aiyana had been particularly fond of. "This is my fault," Aiyana said as we buried the horse. "My presence brings danger to you." "No," I replied firmly. "Ignorance and hatred bring danger. You bring joy and purpose to my life." But the harassment continued to escalate. Someone poisoned our well, forcing us to haul water from the creek for 2 weeks while I dug a new one. Our fence lines were cut repeatedly, allowing cattle to wander off. And one night, someone threw rocks through our windows while we slept. The final straw came when a group of men rode up to our ranch on a Saturday evening, clearly drunk and looking for trouble. I recognized most of them local ranchers and townspeople, who'd never been particularly friendly but had never been openly hostile before. Their leader was Jack Morrison, my neighbor who'd warned me about playing with fire months earlier. "Hayes," he called out as I stepped onto the porch. "We need to talk." "Then talk," I replied, aware that Aiyana was watching from the window behind me. "This Apache business has gone on long enough," Morrison said. "That attack down south has folks scared, and having one of them living right here in our midst isn't helping matters." "Aiyana had nothing to do with that attack," I said calmly. "How do you know?" demanded another man, Pete Williams, who owned the general store in town. "How do you know she's not passing information to her people? How do you know she's not planning something herself?" Because I know her, I replied. She's not a warrior or a spy. She's a healer who wants nothing more than to live in peace. That's what they all say, Morrison sneered. Right up until they put a knife in your back. I felt my temper rising. Jack, you're drunk and you're talking nonsense. I think you and your friends should leave. We're not leaving until you do the right thing, Morrison replied. Send her back to the reservation where she belongs. She's my wife, I said firmly. This is her home. That's not a real marriage and you know it, William spat. It's just a legal trick to keep her from being sent back where she belongs. My marriage is none of your business, I replied. It is when it affects the safety of the whole community, Morrison shot back. We want her gone, Hayes, one way or another. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. I stepped down from the porch, my hand moving instinctively toward the gun on my hip. Are you threatening my wife, Jack? I'm telling you how things are going to be, Morrison replied, his own hand moving toward his weapon. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. 8 men against 1, not good odds, even for someone with my experience. But I wasn't about to back down. Then Aiyana stepped out onto the porch. Stop, she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the evening air. Please, no one needs to die tonight. Stay out of this, Apache, William snarled. My name is Aiyana Hayes, she replied with dignity, and this is my home. She walked down the steps to stand beside me, and I felt a surge of pride at her courage. You want me to leave? She continued, addressing the group. You think I am danger to your families? But I have never hurt anyone. I heal the sick, I help my husband with his ranch, I try to live in peace. Pretty words, Morrison said. But you're still Apache. Yes, Aiyana agreed. I am Apache, but I am also American citizen now, married to good man who saved my life. I have same rights as any of you, Wrights Williams laughed harshly. You don't have any rights, girl. You're just a savage who got lucky. That was when I'd heard enough. That's my wife you're talking to, Williams. And if you can't speak to her with respect, you can get off my property right now, or what? Morrison challenged. Or I'll make you leave, I replied simply. The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Then, unexpectedly, help arrived from an unlikely source. Sheriff Bradley rode up with 2 deputies, their badges glinting in the lamplight from the house. Evening, gentlemen, Bradley said calmly. Seems like quite a gathering. Mind if I ask, what's going on? Just having a neighborly conversation, Sheriff, Morrison said, but his voice lacked conviction. Funny, Bradley replied. From where I'm sitting, it looks more like 8 armed men threatening a married couple on their own property. Now see here, Bradley Williams started. No, you see here, the sheriff interrupted. I've been getting reports of harassment, property damage, and threats against the Hayes family. That stops now. You can't protect them forever, Morrison said sullenly. I don't have to, Bradley replied. They can protect themselves, and they have friends who'll help them do it. As if to emphasize his point, 3 more riders appeared. Out of the darkness my ranch hands, armed and ready for trouble. Boss, called out my foreman, Carlos Mendez. Everything all right here? Just fine, Carlos, I replied. These gentlemen were just leaving. Morrison and his group looked around at the sheriff, his deputies, and my armed ranch hands. The odds had shifted dramatically in our favor. This isn't over, Hayes, Morrison said as he mounted his horse. Yes, it is, Sheriff Bradley replied firmly. Any more harassment of the Hayes family, and I'll arrest the lot of you. That's a promise. After the troublemakers had ridden away, Bradley dismounted and walked over to us. You folks all right? He asked. We're fine, Tom, I replied. Thanks for showing up when you did. Got a tip from Mrs. Patterson, he said. She saw them riding out here and thought there might be trouble. I made a mental note to thank my housekeeper for her vigilance. Sheriff Aiyana said quietly. Thank you for protecting us. I know not everyone agrees with our marriage. Bradley studied her for a moment, then nodded respectfully. Mrs. Hayes, I'll admit I had my doubts about this arrangement at first, but I've seen how you two care for each other, and I've seen the good you do in this community. As far as I'm concerned, you're as much a citizen of this territory as anyone else. After Bradley and his men left, Aiyana and I sat on the porch, both of us shaken by how close we'd come to violence. They will not give up, Aiyana said quietly. Morrison and his friends. They will keep trying to drive me away. Let them try, I replied. We have friends too, and we have the law on our side. Is it enough? I thought about her question. It has to be, because I'm not giving up on us, Aiyana. We've built something good here, something worth fighting for. She looked at me with those dark, intelligent eyes that had captivated me from the first day she'd awakened in my guest room. What have we built, Samuel? What are we to each other? It was a question I had been asking myself for months. We were married, but not in the traditional sense. We were friends, but our bond went deeper than friendship. We were partners in a way that was hard to define but impossible to deny. We're family, I said finally. Not the family either of us was born into, but the family we chose to create. And that's worth fighting for. Aiyana smiled, and I saw tears in her eyes. Yes, we are family. The harassment didn't stop entirely after that night, but it became less frequent and less bold. Sheriff Bradley was true to his word, arresting 2 men for property damage and making it clear that the Hayes family was under his protection. More importantly, we began to find unexpected allies in the community. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the town's only female physician, reached out to Aiyana and began teaching her about modern medical techniques. Several of the ranch wives, initially suspicious, gradually warmed to Aiyana after she helped deliver a difficult birth and saved both mother and child. People fear what they don't understand. Aiyana observed one day as we returned from town, where she'd been helping Dr. Mitchell with a surgery. But when they see that I am just person who wants to help, fear goes away. Not for everyone, I replied, thinking of Morrison and his followers. No, not for everyone, but for enough people. That is how change happens, one person at a time. As our second year of marriage progressed, I began to realize that what we'd created was something truly special. We had built a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. It wasn't the romantic love that poets wrote about, but it was something equally valuably deep, abiding friendship that had been strengthened by adversity and commitment. Aiyana had grown more confident and accomplished. She was now Dr. Mitchell's unofficial assistant, helping with everything from setting broken bones to delivering babies. She'd also started a small school for Apache children whose families lived on the outskirts of town, teaching them to read and write in both English and Apache. You're changing this place, I told her one evening as we watched the sunset from our porch, making it better. We are changing it, she corrected. Together, she was right. We had become a team, each of us contributing our strengths to build something larger than ourselves. I provided the stability and protection of my ranch and my position in the community, while she brought healing, wisdom, and a bridge between 2 cultures that had been at war for too long. One evening, as we sat reading together by the fire, habit we'd maintained since her first days of recovery, Aiyana looked up from her medical textbook and asked a question that surprised me. Double quotes, Samuel, do you ever regret it, marrying me? I set down my own book and looked at her. Why would you ask that? Because you gave up so much. You could have married white woman, had children, lived a normal life. Instead, you married Apache girl to save her from reservation. You sacrificed your future for my freedom. I thought about her words carefully before responding. Aiyana, I didn't sacrifice my future. I found it before you came into my life. I was just existing, working, eating, sleeping, but not really living. You gave me purpose, friendship, and a reason to be better than I was. But children, we have children, I interrupted. Every Apache child you teach to read, every patient you help heal, every person whose life you touch, they're all our children in a way. She smiled at that. I never thought of it that way. Besides, I added with a grin, who says our story is over? We're still young. Who knows what the future holds? As if in response to my words, there was a knock at our door. It was late for visitors, and we exchanged puzzled glances before I went to answer it. Standing on our porch was a young Apache woman, maybe 20 years old, holding a small child. She was clearly exhausted and frightened. Please, she said in broken English. I hear about Apache women who marry white men who live free. I need help. My husband dead. White men want to take my son to boarding school. I run, but have nowhere to go. I looked back at Aiyana, who had come to stand beside me. She studied the woman and child for a moment, then stepped forward. What is your name? She asked in Apache. Nayeli, the woman replied, switching to her native language. And this is my son Ahiga. Aiyana and Nayeli spoke rapidly in Apache for several minutes. Then Aiyana turned to me. She is from San Carlos. Her husband was killed in accident at copper mine. An Indian agent wants to send her son to boarding school in Pennsylvania. She escaped and has been traveling for days, looking for us. I looked at the exhausted woman and her frightened child, and I knew what we had to do. Bring them in, I said. We'll figure out how to help them. As I watched Aiyana lead Nayeli and little Ahiga into our home, I realized that our story was indeed far from over. We had become more than just husband and wife, more than just friends. We had become a beacon of hope for people caught between 2 worlds, a bridge between cultures, and a family that was defined not by blood but by love and commitment. The Apache girl who had been left to starve had not only survived, she had thrived, and in doing so, she had transformed not just her own life but the lives of everyone around her. And the lonely rancher who had shared his bread had discovered that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not just food for the body, but hope for the soul. Our house, once quiet and empty, was now filled with the sounds of different languages, the laughter of children, and the quiet conversations of people planning for a better future. We had created something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy and prejudice, a family, a community, and a legacy that would endure long after we were gone. The end.